Imagine the most elite, genetically modified super soldiers in the galaxy. We are talking about warriors programmed for, just absolute loyalty, engineered to know no fear.
Right, the absolute pinnacle of human military achievement.
Exactly. And they are entrusted with guarding the most dangerous borders of humanity. Now imagine those exact same pristine, loyal super soldiers transforming into basically the universe's most terrifying, bloodthirsty syndicate of space pirates.
Well, that is quite the pivot.
Yeah, I mean, it's a massive shift. And here is the kicker. They didn't turn into monsters because they were corrupted by some ancient mythological evil.
No, they didn't.
They turned into monsters because, well, catastrophic middle management.
Which is so relatable in
Yeah,
a very dark way.
it really is. I mean, have you ever worked within a system, a company, or maybe an institution that was so rigidly bureaucratic, so utterly inflexible that you literally watched its best, most loyal people slowly turn against it?
Oh, definitely. Everyone has experienced some version of that.
Right. You know the kind of environment. The kind where perfectly reasonable requests are met with a brick wall of regulations, where isolated teams are expected to perform miracles with zero support.
And the people at the top demand absolute, unquestioning obedience without ever actually listening to the people on the ground.
Exactly. Without ever listening. Think about that feeling of alienation. Now take that exact scenario, that boiling frustration, and scale it up to a galactic level.
A massive galaxy-spanning level.
Because today's deep dive explores the ultimate and, frankly, the most tragic extreme of that exact phenomenon. Okay, let's unpack this.
Let's do it.
The source material you have shared with us today is a really fascinating text. It's titled Huron's Raiders, The Bitter Legacy of the Badab War.
A great text. Really dense but incredible lore.
It lays out the history of a massive faction of renegades known as the Red Corsairs.
Right.
So our mission today is to deconstruct their tragic fall from loyal protectors to bitter enemies. We are going to look at how sheer institutional arrogance breeds its own worst nightmares. And we want to understand the terrifyingly thin line between a loyal servant and a traitor.
And I think that line, that very thin line, is the entire focal point of this document. The text explicitly tells us that we cannot understand the Red Corsairs simply as villains.
Right. They aren't just cartoon bad guys.
Not at all. I mean, if you look at the broader lore of this universe, there are factions of traitors that date back 10,000 years. Back to a mythic civil war known as the Horus Heresy.
Right, the ancient ones.
Exactly. And those ancient factions are often driven by incomprehensible dark magic or religious zealotry or ancient grudges. But the Red Corsairs are something entirely different.
A lot newer, right?
Much more recent,
Yeah.
and much more grounded, which, as an organizational study, makes them much more terrifying.
Oh, absolutely.
They are the piratical heirs to a failed rebellion that started not with a desire to burn the galaxy, but with a desire to simply do their jobs better.
Which means to understand the monsters they eventually became, we really have to start by looking at the heroes they were originally supposed to be.
The baseline of loyalty.
Right. The source text introduces us to their original identity. They're called the Astral Claws.
The Astral Claws, yes.
And they are described as a loyalist chapter of Space Marines. Now, for you listening, we probably need to clarify what a Space Marine actually is in this context. Because we aren't just talking about, a guy in a spacesuit with a rifle.
No, not at all. A Space Marine or Adeptus Astartes is a bioengineered demigod.
Demigod is the right word.
Truly. They are taken as children, implanted with extra organs. Their rib cages are fused into solid bulletproof plates.
Wait, their rib cages are fused together?
Oh, yeah, into a solid mass of bone. And they are subjected to intense hypnotic psycho-indoctrination.
So they are literally built for this?
Yes, they're designed to be functionally immortal weapons of war who feel no fear. And they possess an absolute, unbreakable loyalty to the Emperor of mankind. I mean, a single Space Marine is a walking tank. A full chapter, which is roughly 1,000 of these warriors, can bring entire planetary systems to their knees.
And the Astral Claws weren't just some new, untested batch of these guys either, right?
No, they had a very long history.
Right. The source notes they were created during the 10th founding, which places their inception in the 35th millennium. So we are talking about thousands of years of established institutional loyalty.
Millennia of service.
Yeah, they had a massive legacy, centuries of honors, medals, victories. They were basically the poster boys for imperial compliance.
That historical momentum is so vital to keep in mind here. They were a deeply entrenched part of the Imperium's military apparatus.
Right.
And because of their elite status and their proven track record, They were given a monumental task. They were assigned to guard a region of space known as the Maelstrom Zone.
The Maelstrom Zone.
Yes. The text describes the Maelstrom as a massive warp rift. It's second only in size and danger to the infamous Eye of Terror.
Okay, let's break down the mechanics of a warp rift so we can really grasp what these guys were dealing with. Because when we say a tear in reality, we aren't talking about like a black hole or a standard cosmic anomaly.
No, standard physics do not apply here.
We are talking about a place where the physical universe literally bleeds into an alternate dimension of pure chaotic energy.
Pure chaos.
It's like being assigned to guard a leaking nuclear reactor, but instead of emitting blind radiation, the leak is pure sentient malice. Like it actively tries to talk to you while you sleep.
That is a terrifyingly accurate analogy.
Right. The maelstrom is a swirling vortex that spits out monstrous mutations, alien fleets, and literal demons.
The environmental hazard of the maelstrom really cannot be overstated. It is a permanent, radiating source of unnatural threat.
Yeah.
I mean, normal human crews go insane just looking at a warp rift.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Physics break down, time dilates, and the astral claws were stationed on a homeworld called Badab Primaris, right on the very edge of this abyss.
Just parked right next to it.
Exactly. They were tasked with patrolling its borders. They were essentially serving as a containment lid on a boiling pot of cosmic horror.
Imagine you are part of the most elite tactical response team on the planet, and your distant bosses assign you to a remote, incredibly hostile security watchtower on the very edge of civilization.
The absolute middle of nowhere.
Yeah. Guard this, they tell you. Don't let anything out. And then they just leave you there.
No backup.
Right. Not for a year, not for a decade, for millennia. I mean, if you stick your most elite defenders right next to a sentient hazard zone, completely isolate them, and just leave them to it, how does that not fundamentally rewire their psychology?
Well, it does. It creates an intense psychological pressure cooker.
I can imagine.
You know, a Space Marine's mind is heavily conditioned, but it is still fundamentally human at its core.
Right. There is still a person in there somewhere.
Exactly. So when you are the only line of defense against an apocalyptic threat, day in and day out, and the central authority, the bureaucracy of the Imperium back on Terra, is completely unresponsive, you develop a profound sense of self-reliance.
You would have to.
You have to. If you wait for orders or supply drops that take centuries to arrive due to the inefficiencies of a galaxy-spanning administration, your world burns. So you learn to solve lethal problems on your own.
You stop relating to the distant bureaucrats who sent you there in the first place.
You start actively resenting them.
Yeah.
That forced self-reliance breeds pride. The source text actually makes a point to note that the astral claws were a proud chapter.
Which usually precedes a fall.
Always. Over generations, that pride evolves into a fierce, insular independence. When your chapter is sacrificing his brothers every single day to hold back the horrors of the maelstrom, and you receive missives from clerks on safe, wealthy core worlds demanding, standard paperwork and rigid adherence to protocol.
Oh, man.
You begin to question the wisdom and eventually the authority of those clerks.
It's like you and your team are going to look at each other and say, we are the only ones who actually know how to run this sector. We bleed for this dirt. Why are we taking orders from people who have no idea what it takes to survive out here?
Exactly.
It's a very natural, almost inevitable thought process.
And the bitter irony here is that the very qualities that made the astral claws perfect for guarding the maelstrom in the first place, their tactical autonomy, their unshakable resolve, their ability to operate without support, those were the exact ingredients that formulated their eventual rebellion.
Wow.
The Imperium built a weapon to operate independently in the dark, and then was completely shocked when that weapon started thinking independently.
Which brings us to the boiling point. The isolation, the pride, the sheer necessity of survival, it all finally spills over. We move from this baseline of strained loyalty into an actual physical conflict. But I'm curious, how does an empire spanning 1 million worlds even notice that one specific chapter on the edge of nowhere is starting to go rogue? Like, practically speaking, what is the mechanism that triggers the downfall?
That is a great question.
The source talks about the astral claws being betrayed by their own ambition, but ambition is a pretty abstract concept. How did it physically manifest?
It manifests through logistics, and specifically the withholding of resources.
Ah, the money.
Always follow the money. The text outlines that the leader of the astral claws, a chapter master named Luftred Huron, looked at the deteriorating situation in the Maelstrom zone and realized The current imperial strategy was just insufficient.
It wasn't working anymore.
Right. He believed that to truly contain the threat, he needed a vastly expanded military force. He needed a massive fleet, heavily fortified planetary networks, and a standing army exponentially larger than what his chapter was allotted.
Which makes total logical sense if you are the guy actually fighting the war. You want better tools to do the job.
Of course you do. But to build those tools, Huron needed resources. So he made the fatal pragmatic decision to stop sending the sector's planetary tithes to the wider Imperium.
Oh boy.
Yeah. The tithe is the fundamental lifeblood of the Imperium's economy. Every planet is mathematically assessed and required to provide a specific quota of raw materials, manufactured goods, or human soldiers to the central government.
And Huron just stopped sending it.
Huron essentially intercepted these tithes from the Badab sector, keeping the resources localized to build up his own defensive empire around the Maelstrom.
He created a black hole in the imperial spreadsheet.
That is exactly what he did.
And knowing what we know about rigidly bureaucratic systems, I mean, nothing triggers an administrative panic faster than a disrupted revenue stream.
The Imperium operates entirely on those rigid algorithms. So when the Administratum, the massive bureaucracy that governs the Imperium, saw that the Badab sector has ceased its tithe output, they didn't send a diplomatic envoy to ask Liftrid Huron why the resources were delayed.
They didn't ask for context.
No, they didn't look at the context of the Maelstrom's increasing threat level at all. They simply saw a gear spinning out of alignment. They saw insubordination.
And the text is incredibly stark about the Imperium's response. It explicitly states, quote, "The Imperium responded with overwhelming force."
Overwhelming force.
They didn't try to negotiate. They didn't try to understand the unique pressures the Astral Claws were facing. They just reached for the biggest hammer they had.
Because in a system that values absolute, unquestioning conformity above all else, independent thought is mathematically indistinguishable from treason.
That is such a wild concept.
It is, but the Imperium's structure is so vast and so dogmatic that it physically cannot accommodate nuance. If Luftchaharon is keeping the tithe, he's a traitor.
The intent doesn't matter.
The reasons do not matter. The bureaucracy demands compliance. And when compliance is refused, the only mechanism the Imperium has left is annihilation.
So, simply by trying to do their impossible job better, but trying to secure their sector against a literal cosmic nightmare, the Astral Claws crossed an invisible tripwire.
They did.
And that heavy-handed response escalated what might have been a solvable administrative or logistical dispute into a full-blown galactic disaster. The source identifies this resulting conflict as the Badab War. It lasted from 901 to 912 in the 41st millennium.
A brutal, decade-long civil war.
For full decade. Let's talk about the sheer mechanics of a space marine fighting another space marine.
It's horrific.
The text notes this was a scale of internecine conflict not seen since the ancient Horus Heresy. Now, for context, the Horus Heresy was the foundational civil war that nearly destroyed the Imperium 10,000 years prior, where half the Emperor's legions turned traitor.
Right.
The Badab War is being compared to that. What does it actually look like on the ground when two forces of genetically engineered, psycho-indoctrinated super soldiers go to war with each other?
It is an absolute tactical nightmare. You have to remember, Space Marines are designed to fight alien swarms, heavily fortified human rebellions, and demonic incursions.
Right, they fight monsters.
They are shock troops, meant to strike with overwhelming speed and lethality. When you pit them against their own kind, every tactical advantage is perfectly mirrored.
Oh, because they know exactly how the other side fights.
Exactly. Both sides possess the same indestructible armor, the same devastating weaponry, and the same strategic playbooks.
So there are no surprises.
Very few. A single city block could take months to conquer because neither side is physically capable of feeling fear or surrendering. It becomes a horrific, grinding war of attrition.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. The source presents us with a fascinating paradox here. In one breath, it claims the Astral Claws were betrayed by their own ambition. But then, almost immediately, it lays the blame squarely on the Imperium's refusal to listen and its rigid, oppressive bureaucracy.
Yeah, the text definitely holds two ideas at once.
So, looking at the mechanics of this conflict, who actually threw the first punch here?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the tragedy of the Badab War is that it is a deadly feedback loop. Ambition and rigid bureaucracy are natural chemical antagonists.
They just don't mix.
Right. Huron's ambition was pragmatic. He wanted to secure the sector. But the Imperium's inflexibility meant that the only way for Huron to realize that ambition was to break the rules.
Right.
So the first punch was really the Imperium's inability to govern with nuance. By responding to a localized supply dispute with an armada of warships, the Imperium backed the Astral Claws into a corner where rebellion felt like the only logical or even honorable choice left.
Let's just pause and consider the sheer scale of the waste happening here. This war lasted for over 10 years. We are talking about an entire decade where the Imperium's greatest, most elite weapons were doing nothing but systematically destroying each other.
It is a staggering misallocation of military assets.
It's insane.
Truly. While several loyalist Space Marine chapters in the Astral Claws were busy grinding each other into dust across the Badab sector, the actual threats were completely ignored.
Right, the Maelstrom.
Exactly. The horrors lurking inside the Maelstrom Zone, the very things the Astral Claws were originally stationed there to guard against, were left unchecked to raid and expand.
So they basically left the back door wide open while fighting on the front porch.
That's a perfect way to put it. The bureaucracy was so obsessed with enforcing internal compliance that it willfully blinded itself to the actual security of the realm.
They burned down the house to punish the guard dog. That is the only way to describe it. They destroyed their own defensive infrastructure just to prove a point about following the rules.
A very expensive point.
Extremely. And that level of utter, short-sighted devastation leads directly to the most personal, tragic moment in this entire narrative.
The conclusion of the physical war.
Right. The Astral Claws ultimately lose because, you can't fight an empire of a million worlds forever, even if you are a Space Marine.
No, eventually the numbers catch up to you.
Their homeworld of Badab Primaris is besieged and ruined. Their forces are decimated. And their leader, Lifted Huron, is pushed to the absolute breaking point. This is where the story shifts from a military history into something deeply spiritual and, frankly, horrific.
The source material focuses tightly on Huron's final moments during the fall of Badab. His physical condition is desperate. He is grievously wounded. Half of his body is essentially destroyed by a weapon blast.
Oh, wow. Half his body.
Yeah, he is barely clinging to life. His chapter is shattered. And he manages to flee with the meager remnants of his forces into the uncharted depths of the Maelstrom itself to escape the Imperial blockade.
Wait, so he is fleeing into the very cosmic hazard zone he spent his entire life guarding against?
Precisely. It is the only place the Imperium won't immediately follow. And in the depths of that warp rift, near death, his mind shattered by defeat and consumed by an overwhelming hatred for the Imperium that destroyed his life's work, he makes a pact.
A deal with the devil.
Exactly. The text states he strikes a bargain with the ruinous powers, which is the overarching in-universe term for the forces of chaos.
Okay, let's explore this. How does one actually strike a bargain with the ruinous powers? Because chaos isn't just, a guy in a red suit holding a pitchfork and a contract. It's a manifestation of raw emotion, right?
That's correct.
So how does a fiercely logical, pragmatic military commander suddenly pivot to bargaining with literal demons?
Well, it happens because the warp is a mirror to the soul. Chaos feeds on extreme emotion, and in that moment, in the depths of the Maelstrom, Huron is radiating pure, unadulterated spite.
He's just furious.
He is radiating a sense of absolute betrayal. So he pledges his own soul, and critically, the souls of his remaining warriors, to eternal service.
He decides for all of them.
He does. But he doesn't do it out of a sudden religious awakening. The text is very specific about his motivation. He wants the power to survive, and more importantly, he wants the power to one day destroy the Imperium.
This is the ultimate toxic breakup.
That is exactly what it is.
The text explicitly notes that he wanted to destroy the Imperium he believed had betrayed him. He essentially decides he will burn down the entire galaxy just to get back at his old boss. It's an incredibly spiteful, intensely human reaction wrapped in this grand sci-fi opera.
What's fascinating here is the theme of perceived betrayal. That is the crucial psychological element. Huron never views himself as the instigator of this 10-year bloodbath.
Right, he's the victim in his own mind.
In his mind, he is the absolute victim. He's the loyal soldier who was abandoned on the frontier, misunderstood when he tried to take initiative, and then violently persecuted by an ungrateful, decaying empire.
And that self-righteous anger is his absolute downfall, because it makes him totally blind to his own corruption.
Highly vulnerable and completely blind. When an individual, even a genetically enhanced super soldier, is consumed by self-righteous anger, they can justify almost any moral compromise.
Right, because they feel owed.
Exactly. They believe their revenge is a fundamental cosmic justice. Huron didn't fall to chaos because he was tempted by some abstract concept of evil or because he wanted to learn dark magic.
He fell out of pure hatred for the Imperium's bureaucracy.
Wow.
The ruinous powers simply offered him the tool he needed to enact his revenge. He leveraged his soul not out of piety, but out of absolute spite for his former masters.
And that distinction is so vital to this story because it dictates exactly what kind of monster he becomes.
Yes, it shapes everything that follows.
The deal with the dark gods is struck. Huron survives his catastrophic wounds. But the resulting faction that emerges from the Maelstrom, the Red Corsairs, they don't turn into what you might expect.
No, they don't.
They don't become mindless cultists living in caves and chanting in the dark. Instead, they weaponize their survival into a terrifyingly practical new empire. Our source material highlights this with a fascinating concept. It says they value pragmatism over piety.
And this is where the Red Corsairs diverge significantly from the older, more mythic enemies of the Imperium.
Well, the ancient traitor legions from the Horus Heresy are often portrayed as fanatical. They might spend centuries enacting bizarre rituals to appease a specific chaos god, or launching crusades based on prophetic visions.
Right, very religious.
Very religious. But the text specifically states that the Red Corsairs are not devout worshippers in that traditional sense. Above all else, they are pragmatists.
Okay, wait, let's pause. I have to push back on this a little, or at least ask for a deeper mechanical explanation.
Sure.
How do you literally pledge your soul to the ruinous powers of chaos, but remain pragmatic?
It sounds like a contradiction.
It really does. How do you not become a devout worshiper when the gods you made a deal with literally exist and can mutate your flesh on a whim? Are they basically trying to use the chaos gods as a utility rather than the other way around? Is that even a survivable strategy?
It is a phenomenal contradiction, yes,
Mhm.
and it is the core of their unique identity. In their own minds, yes, they're using chaos as a tool. They recognize the raw power of the warp. They utilize the physical mutations it provides to make themselves stronger warriors. They use the chaotic energies of the Maelstrom to hide their ships.
So they use the environment to their advantage?
Exactly. But they do not bow in blind reverence to the gods themselves. They view themselves fundamentally as a military and criminal organization first, and servants of chaos second. They operate with cold, calculating, piratical logic.
The sheer danger of a pragmatic villain just cannot be overstated.
It makes them incredibly dangerous.
Because if you are fighting an ancient cult born of religious zealotry, you can sometimes predict their movements, right? You know they will attack a specific shrine or wait for a specific astrological alignment to summon a demon. But you can't predict the Red Corsairs using arcane logic.
Exactly. Because the Red Corsairs are essentially a massive, decentralized criminal syndicate.
A mob.
Yeah, a heavily armed mob. They attack where it is profitable, they raid for supplies, they steal warships, they plunder munitions, and they kidnap serfs to run their foundries.
They are fighting a completely different kind of war.
They fight a logistical war, not a holy war. They use the terrifying powers of the warp not to enact grand magical rituals, but to execute highly efficient pirate raids on Imperial shipping lanes.
But this raises a massive logistical question for me. If Huron and his forces are essentially wiped out, I mean, our source says there were maybe 200 astral claws left when they fled into the Maelstrom. How do they pose any threat at all?
It's a small number.
200 guys, even heavily armed space marines, don't make an empire. Yet the text tells us that the Red Corsairs transformed from that pitiful band of 200 survivors into a massive, sprawling force that now rivals a pre-heresy legion in size.
We're talking tens of thousands of warriors.
Right. They operate as a vast pirate fleet with Huron, who now calls himself Huron Blackheart, the tyrant of Adab sitting at the head. How on earth do you go from 200 beaten, broken soldiers to a legion-sized empire? Where does the manpower come from?
The source provides the answer, and it ties directly back to the Imperium's oppressive bureaucracy.
Of course it does.
The text explains that the Red Corsairs act as, quote, a haven for those who have turned their backs on the Emperor.
A haven.
Yes. This is where their pragmatic nature becomes their greatest asset. Because they are not dogmatically tied to a specific chaotic religion, they are highly accessible. They offer a tangible, functional alternative to the Imperium's rigid rules.
They become the ultimate destination for the disenfranchised. I mean, think about how many people in a galaxy-spanning hyper-authoritarian regime must fall through the cracks.
Millions.
Yeah.
entire planetary systems. Let's look at the mechanics of defecting in this universe.
Yeah.
If you are a minor Space Marine chapter that is slightly deviated from the strict combat doctrines of Terra, or if you are a planetary defense commander who missed a production ties because of a famine,
Which happens.
right, and you are now facing summary execution by an Imperial auditor, what are your options?
You don't have many.
You have none. You can't surrender to the Imperium. The bureaucracy demands your death for the infraction. Your only options are to die or to run.
And Huron Blackheart has basically set up a massive neon sign in the Maelstrom that says, "Come to us."
Precisely. Huron's system is brutally simple. He doesn't care about your past. He doesn't care if you worship a specific god or no god at all.
He just wants numbers.
He doesn't care what minor infraction got you marked for death by the Administratum. He only cares if you can fight and if you were willing to fight the Imperium.
Wow. Oh.
By acting as a haven, the Red Corsairs didn't need to slowly recruit and train new soldiers over centuries. They simply vacuumed up every outcast, every rebel, and every desperate, heavily armed soldier that the Imperium's inflexibility pushed away.
That is wild.
They grew organically and explosively by capitalizing on the Imperium's own administrative failures.
It's a genius organizational structure for an insurgency, honestly, and it's entirely decentralized. Because they operate as a vast pirate fleet, they don't need to hold territory in the traditional sense.
The static borders.
Right. If you are the Imperium, how do you defeat an enemy that doesn't have borders? You can't lay siege to a capital city if the capital is a mobile fleet of stolen battleships constantly weaving in and out of a warp rift.
You can't catch them.
They just exist as this fluid, predatory ecosystem. They strike a shipping lane, steal the cargo, recruit the surviving crew who hate their Imperial masters, and vanish back into the Maelstrom before a response fleet can even be mobilized.
And you have to understand, the Imperium's military is designed to fight massive set-piece battles against static empires, or to defend fortified worlds against alien swarms.
It's slow.
It is a slow, lumbering beast. It is completely ill-equipped to fight a highly mobile, decentralized network of super soldier pirates who know all the Imperium's tactical playbooks because they used to be in the Imperium.
Which brings us to the final, and I think the most profound realization of this deep dive. The source material refers to this as the ultimate horror of the Red Corsairs.
Yes, the ultimate horror.
We move from looking at them as an external military threat, a bunch of heavily armed pirates shooting lasers and stealing cargo, to realizing they represent an internal philosophical threat to the Imperium's very identity.
This raises an important question about institutional rot. The concluding thoughts in our source text are incredibly potent. It states plainly that the Red Corsairs are the physical embodiment of the Imperium's self-inflicted wounds.
They are a symptom.
They are the direct, undeniable product of its arrogance, its refusal to listen, and its suffocating bureaucracy.
The text makes sure to emphasize a key point, too. Quote, "They are not a cursed legion from a forgotten age."
Right, this isn't a myth.
This is an ancient history from 10,000 years ago that current commanders can easily write off as a fairy tale. The Badab War is recent history. The men leading the pirate fleets were once celebrated imperial heroes.
They were brothers in arms.
Yeah. They are living, breathing proof that the line between a loyal son and a bitter traitor is razor thin.
And that proximity is what makes them terrifying to the Imperial leadership. Every time an Imperial commander faces the Red Corsairs in battle, they are not fighting an alien menace with incomprehensible motives.
Yeah.
They are fighting a dark reflection of their own system. They are looking in a mirror.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener? I mean, why should you care about the political architecture of a fictional space empire and the logistical nightmares of a pirate fleet?
Fair questions.
Because beneath the grand sci-fi tragedy, this story is a universally applicable lesson in institutional rot and alienation. It is a masterclass in how bad leadership manufactures its own destruction.
Absolutely.
Whenever any leadership structure, whether it's a galactic emperor, a corporate CEO, or a middle manager in an office park, relies entirely on absolute obedience and rigid bureaucracy, it inevitably creates enemies out of its best people.
It alienates the people actually doing the work.
Exactly. When you refuse to listen to the people doing the hard work on the ground, when you respond to their ambition or their requests for help with a bureaucratic hammer, you don't crush the ambition. You just turn it against yourself.
It raises a fundamental question about the viability of the Imperium itself. The ultimate horror that the text refers to isn't the physical size of Huron's pirate fleet or the fact that they have stolen a lot of ships.
Right.
The real horror is the dawning realization that the Imperium's entire operating system is fundamentally broken. The Imperium created Huron Blackheart.
They built him.
They built the astral claws to be independent and fierce. They placed them in an impossible situation. They abandoned them. They punished them violently for simply trying to survive. And now they have to bleed to deal with the fallout. The Imperium's reaping exactly what it sowed.
And because the Imperium's bureaucracy is seemingly incapable of self-reflection or structural change, it means this cycle is doomed to repeat forever.
The Administratum cannot reform itself.
Right. It is too massive, too entrenched in its own dogma. Therefore, it will continue to issue heavy-handed edicts, it will continue to execute planetary governors for minor spreadsheet errors, and it will continue to alienate its own defenders. Which means the Red Corsairs will never, ever run out of recruits.
The bureaucracy is a machine that perpetually prints its own enemies. The more rigidly the Imperium tightens its grip, the more systems and soldiers slip through its fingers directly into the waiting arms of Huron Blackheart.
Which perfectly sets up our final thoughts. Let's do a quick recap of this incredible, tragic journey we've taken today. We started with the Astral Claws, these elite, fiercely loyal super soldiers tasked with an impossible job.
Guarding the Maelstrom.
Guarding the Maelstrom, staring directly into a cosmic abyss of pure malice for thousands of years. The immense pressure, the isolation, and the complete lack of support from Central Command bred an ambition and a self-reliance that the rigid Imperium simply couldn't tolerate.
It was a recipe for disaster.
When Lufter Huron tried to pragmatically secure his sector by withholding resources, the Imperium didn't ask questions. They responded with overwhelming military force, leading to the devastating, decade-long Badab War, a grueling, horrific civil war of Space Marine against Space Marine.
A conflict that culminated in the utter defeat of the Astral Claws, pushing a physically broken and psychologically shattered Lufter Huron to make a desperate, spiteful pact with the ruinous powers of chaos.
He gave up everything.
He traded his soul and the souls of his men not for religious worship, but for mere survival and the power to enact revenge upon the empire he felt had betrayed him.
And from those ashes, deep within the Warp Rift, they were reborn, not as mindless chanting cultists, but as the Red Corsairs, a highly pragmatic, decentralized pirate empire that managed to grow from a meager 200 survivors into a massive legion-sized fleet.
An incredible resurgence.
And they get it simply by acting as a haven for everyone else the Imperium had broken, discarded, or hunted down over administrative errors. They became the ultimate mirror, reflecting the Imperium's own arrogance, inflexibility, and failures right back at it.
It remains a textbook case of how inflexible authoritarian systems eventually destroy the very people trying to uphold them.
And that leaves us with a chilling extrapolation built strictly on the mechanical logic of the source text we've explored today. I want you to think about this as you go about your day.
It's a heavy thought.
If a mere 200 survivors, trapped in a hellish cosmic vortex, can grow their forces to rival an ancient pre-heresy traitor legion simply by serving as a haven for those broken by the Imperium's oppressive bureaucracy,
then the Imperium has a major problem.
then the Imperium isn't just fighting a defensive war against pirates. It is actively funding, fueling, and recruiting for the enemy every single time it enforces its own rigid rules.
Every single time.
Every time a distant clerk signs a heavy-handed order, every time an auditor demands a tithe the starving planet cannot pay, they are practically handing Huron Blackheart another warship and another loyal crew. So here is the thought to mull over. Does the Imperium's very structure guarantee that it will eventually, inevitably, be swallowed whole by the very monsters it insists on creating? Are they just mathematically delaying the inevitable collapse of their own empire?
It is a terrifying structural paradox. The harder they fight to maintain control, the faster they accelerate their own demise.
It really is. The mechanics of their own bureaucracy are their ultimate doom. Thank you so much for providing these materials. It's been an incredible journey unpacking the lore and the deeply human tragedy beneath the armor. Keep questioning the systems around you, keep looking for the nuance behind the rules, and never underestimate the danger of a rigid bureaucracy. We'll catch you on the next deep dive.